we have our internal audit risk assessment. Mrs. Tossan, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Burdine. So I have the privilege of serving as chair of the Internal Audit Committee this past year. I've been on the committee since I got on the board 5 years ago. And I just want to take a moment to remind everyone of why we have an Internal Audit Committee on the board. It's not something that's mandated, but it's something that this board believes is critical to the operation of this district. So the audit committee exists to engage either an internal auditor or an independent consulting firm to conduct audits for us. And they conduct audits of various departments, programs, and our systems in order to identify potential risks and threats to an organization's goals and to make suggestions for mitigating those risks. So different than the mandatory financial audit that's conducted each year, the internal audit function is not mandatory, but in our view is extremely necessary, as I said. Fort Bend ISD has a very robust audit program, and we have, since at least I've been on the board, so I can attest to that. And it has helped us identify many ways to operate more efficiently and effectively. As Mr. Rice always likes to say, it's not a gotcha type of process, but it's a process that allows for an independent, objective, and assurance activity that helps improve systems and processes where necessary. We currently have engaged Gibson Consulting as an independent consulting firm to conduct these audits for us. We recently asked Gibson to conduct a risk assessment for Fort Bend ISD in order to identify areas where we might be in most need of audits in the upcoming years, and in order to help us plan not only this year, but over the course of the next few years. So Gibson did conduct that assessment, which I will let Mr. Greg Gibson talk about in more detail. And the audit committee has reviewed the assessment, and we have recommendations for the board for audits to be conducted within the next school year. So with that, I will turn it over to Greg Gibson to give the presentation of the risk assessment and the recommendations of the audit committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tassan. President Burdine, Dr. Dupree, members of the board, it's my privilege to be here tonight to go through the risk assessment. As was previously stated, we've been your outside internal, that doesn't really make sense, an external internal auditor for the past 7 years. And we are very proud to be part of the board's effort for continuous improvement. And so we are happy to be here tonight to go through this presentation. I'm going to define what a risk assessment is because it's a little bit different from our normal audits. And then we've kind of broken up the audits. This is actually our second risk assessment. We did one about 6 years ago when we started the program. And so these risk assessments are updated every 5 or 6 years. And so it required a little bit different approach than the first time around. And then we'll get to the audit committee recommendations at the end of the presentation. So risk assessment is not a typical audit. We're not here tonight to give you the results of an audit of a particular program or department. A risk assessment is a planning mechanism so that we can decide what makes sense to audit next. And so the higher priority items are identified through the risk assessment, and those items are generally the ones that are proposed for a short-term audit plan, and then eventually we would develop a long-term audit plan for the years after that. Each area is evaluated with respect to risk factors. We'll talk about those in a minute. And both inherent risks and district-specific risks are considered. And an inherent risk is, for example, special education is by nature an inherently risky area because of all the regulatory requirements that exist in special ed. This is our highest needs, in some cases, medically fragile student populations. Student safety is a high-risk area, and so there are certain areas of a school system that are just inherently higher risk than others. In addition to that, each district may have its own risk factors, management turnover, new information systems, performance trends, either not going up or not favorable, those create internal risks. Those factors were also considered in the risk assessment. This work, like a lot of our work, involves a lot of analysis of a lot of data. So in order to evaluate these risk factors, we had to collect a lot of information. Again, this was global. It was district-wide, not digging into any specific department, but getting general information on all programs and areas. We also conducted interviews. We performed the risk assessment scoring using some algorithms, but by and large, it was a subjective evaluation of risk. And then we basically listed up all the higher priority items for the Board Audit Committee to consider for the next year's plan. We broke, because this wasn't the first time around, we've already spent 5 years auditing different programs and operational administrative areas. And so we had to break up the risk assessment into categories. And so what we did is we looked at the group of audits that or the areas that we've already audited, and that was one group. And so some of those areas have been subject to follow-up audits, others have not. And so we wanted to look at that group separately because they've been recently audited. Then there was another group of areas that have not been subject to audit yet. And then there was a third area of other more narrow risk areas that were not related to an entire department or program, but things that came up during our interviews and data analysis that just pointed us to say, these are other risk factors that you might want to consider addressing through your internal audit program. Here are the previously audited areas. So on the list of all those, these are all the audits we have conducted since 2014. And they are in order of what we assess to be the highest risk, and in terms of when you should consider revisiting these. So some of these, as you can see, more than half have been subject to a follow-up audit already. And so that was one of the indicators. If they've been subject to a follow-up recently, then there's not really a need to do that again. But you can see that a lot of these have not been subject to re-audits or follow-up audits, and so we are suggesting that the follow-up audit be conducted for these. So the facilities and operations is the highest risk area. One of the reasons it's high is that the audit was one of the earlier audits we conducted, but it has not been subject to a follow-up audit yet. And so this is why it's on top of the list. There's also been some turnover in that area, and each of these areas has reported the implementation status of recommendations made from the audit. And so we also looked at those to see how much progress had been made. And if progress hasn't been made as much as what might be expected, that might also increase the risk. So there's several factors that we considered in evaluating whether or not a follow-up audit was needed, or in some cases a re-audit. And a re-audit might be warranted if we did a follow-up audit, but there was still not sufficient progress, or it had been a period of time had lapsed where we think this should be re-audited again. And so this is the list of all the areas that we've audited. The last few, transportation and child nutrition, those are happening this year, the original audits. And so those you shouldn't need to look at in the near future. For the unaudited areas, we applied 9 risk factors to evaluate all of these unaudited areas. And so you'll see on the next slide a table that basically measures each of these risk factors against all of the remaining functional areas that are subject, that have not been audited yet. So you can see that most people, when they think of internal audit, they think of the potential for fraud or theft. That's only one risk factor. As you can tell, I'm not going to read them all, but there's a number of risk factors that need to be considered when evaluating the risk of an area. So this is the grid. You can the areas are listed on the left. These are all the areas that have not been subject to audit yet. The red boxes indicate higher risk, the yellow moderate risk, and the green lower risk areas based on those 9 risk factors that I talked about on the previous slide. And so all of these are scored, considering both inherent and district-specific risk factors. Then there's a fiscal impact weight that's applied, or an additional scoring factor And that really relates to the size of the area in terms of the magnitude, size of the budget, number of employees. If you have a larger unit, it obviously will have more of an impact on an organization than a smaller unit. So we wanted to have some way to adjust for that factor. And then there's a score, high to low, based on the summation of those risks. And the highest possible score was 105. So we didn't have anybody even near the 105. In fact, they were approximately half that. And so these are relative risks, and you can kind of see which areas have higher risks and what areas than others. So based on that, this was kind of the sequencing of the areas. Academic program management was first, student services. You can see all the way down through the item 12 of all of these are all of the areas that we have not yet audited. So the other areas we looked at were, again, these don't relate to specific departments, but they were topics that came up. Information security, which is every school system on the planet is dealing with this right now, the cybersecurity. The district's currently involved in an ERP selection consideration for new finance and HR systems. The disaster readiness obviously is an area of interest because of Hurricane Harvey. And so these are things that just came up that we wanted to put in front of the Board Audit Committee to say we're not really recommending a particular scope of work. This is just a risk area that came up in our evaluation of the risk, and we wanted to bring it to your attention. So if you look at the highest risks in each of the three buckets, we have previously audited, yet to be audited, and other risk factors. These were these came to the top in terms of the risk ranking. And the Board Audit Committee is considering, they looked at this information and they made a selection of the facilities management follow-up, the academic program management audit, and a communications audit. And so these three are contained in a cost proposal that this board is considering later tonight. And so this was really the essence of the risk assessment, was to support the development of this plan and the audit program for next year. And I'll stop there, and if there are any questions about the risk assessment, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. We appreciate you being here and presenting that for us this evening. The only thing I wanted to add is that the Audit Committee reviewed the risk assessment with Mr. Gibson and his team in depth. We looked at and debated various of these topics. And in fact, if we could have, I think we would have had 5 audits, but obviously not only was that beyond our budget, but it was beyond what our staff could, we're always mindful of what the Fort Bend ISD staff can handle, and some of these were overlapping. So at the end, after much discussion and consideration of all the risk factors, this is what the Audit Committee is recommending for approval.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Mrs. Helliger?
Thank you for your presentation. So I guess to what you stated, Kristen, these are the 3 that you all came up with. I would like to put my hat and say that I really would like for us to, if I'm reading this correctly, consider the Gifted and Talented program based on some of the communications that we've had here in the boardroom. I really think that needs to be a priority for us.
So we discussed that at length, and one of the reasons we didn't come down with that program as a recommendation was because there are changes that are currently underway and that are getting started. And so we didn't feel like the timing was right this next year, that we needed it to be implemented, and then once implemented, to be audited following that. So it was one of those that was high on our list as well, and certainly made the top of the cut. But given the timing of the implementation, because we've just hired a new is it executive director or director, and there are several things that are about to be implemented, we felt like after discussing it, with Mr. Gibson and Dr. Dupree that it was a little premature. And after a year of implementation, we could dig in and see what was going on with the new changes.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I can understand that. I mean, another view of it would be to do the audit now. That way you have a clean slate to kind of see where it's at, you know, and so that as you're implementing new programs, you really can see, okay, what are the main issues, and have something to go by so that you can put the program together, you know. So, I mean, that's just another, you know, way to look at that, because we're putting things together. I mean, the audit is not, you know, oh, everything has to be so ugly, you know, with it, anything that comes out of it. So it could have been used as a way to plan and put things in motion, so that we know that these are the things that we're having issues with, versus we think we're having issues with this. And since we have never really audited the gifted and talented program, we really don't know. So now that the new person, I'm sure, and I have every confidence in this new person that's coming aboard, however, that way they know exactly what's happening and where we are today. So that would be my recommendation.
And we did discuss that as well. That was part of our conversation. At the end of the day, we could choose 3, and any additions priced us out, and we felt like we usually do 2 audits and then 1 follow-up. So the 2 audits that rose to the top were the 2 that we're recommending. So, but we did have a lot of discussion around that as well. So your point is well taken.
Mr. Rice. Mrs. James.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson, for your presentation, and thank you, Mrs. Tosan, for your leadership on the audit committee on behalf of the board. I have a question to understand. Well, first of all, also, Ms. Helliger, thank you for your comments, because the Gifted and Talented program has been struggling for a long time, and so I understand where you're coming from, and I kind of agree, but I recognize also, I guess we have to prioritize stuff. So maybe that's a thing we remember for next year at this time, and are sure that we add it in.
Can we make sure we record that so that we can get this on the list, top priority list for next year?
It is on the list. I mean, so when we discussed it, it was at the top of the list. We just had to pick 2, and because of the timing, that's what we came out with the other 2. But it is, speaking especially as a GT mom, that is at the top of the list.
And I'm sure somebody out there in TV land is going to remind us on May 13, 2019, we said that our next audit, we will have the Gifted and Talented on the list. Thank you.
No, and I mean, I agree with you, because the other one that's up there, it's pretty highly ranked, is student services. And I thought, okay, well, that would be a good one as well, because that program's been refined pretty well. But what I like about these top 4 that are on here they are directly impacting students, and so that's what came to my mind. So I know we can't do everything at once, but let me go back to what my question was, and that is, what does it, when you say academic program management, what does that mean? That, as a title, I mean, what does it involve? Yeah.
We're primarily focusing on your general education program. So we've already done special education. Gifted and Talented, if we ever do that program, would be separate. ELL programs would be separate. So it's primarily focusing on your general education program. Within that, we're looking at many aspects of your general education program. The curriculum, we're not evaluating the curriculum against the state standards unless that hasn't been done. But we're focusing on how consistent that curriculum is being implemented, whether or not it's being implemented with fidelity across the district. And so we do that through classroom observations. We look at lesson plans. We talk to school administrators. We talk to teachers. We talk to district administrators. And so we try to get a sense of whether or not the curriculum is being implemented with fidelity, or it's not, and if it's not, why not.
And would there be a component of that that's looking at policy that is related to curriculum to make sure that the local policy is being
Yeah, like every audit we do, we start with a policy framework for that area. And so curriculum would be no different. And so we look at both the legal and local policies that drive that function. We're also looking at how technology supports that function. We're looking at how student data is analyzed to identify needs and whether or not those needs are acted on. We look at professional development. We look at how you're applying the relatively new teacher evaluation system. And so we look at teacher orientation and training on the curriculum when they arrive. So
Wow,
it's a
that
pretty
sounds like a lot.
It's the most significant audit that you've done. It's the broadest, well, and it makes sense because it's the main thing that you do. And so
All right.
it is
It reminds me of when I first came on the board, the curriculum audit that was done, and then that really turned into being more properly relabeled the district audit, because it overlapped into every single department in every single area. So it sounds like you'll be touching on a lot of those same things, which that's good. I have one other question, and I'm not sure who answers this one, but my question has to do with when you've done audits and you make recommendations. Maybe this is more for the audit committee or for Dr. Dupree. There's recommendations that are made. Is there a way the board can see the status of the different recommendations from an audit? Is that, how is that available to me as a person not on the audit committee?
Yes, the dashboard is available to the board. It's available to the board.
Okay, I might need an
We can follow up on that.
IT lesson.
Because we asked for that, so I don't know that that's been communicated to the full board, but several months ago, we asked for the entire board to have access to that dashboard so that everyone could see.
Okay,
Mm-hmm. And I would also add that all audits are available on the website for the public to see them as well.
okay, and the recommendations are all listed and their ranking and their priority and all of that, and I remember that. I just, I'm not certain how to see where we are in terms of all this work. So thank you.
Ms. Hellier?
I want to try to get as many questions as I can out now before I go to vote for this. Just as a question, so talk about the communication audit and what that's going to look like.
The communications audit will be similar, even though it's kind of a unique area to the other areas that we look at. We'll apply a similar approach. We'll look at the policies and any governing documents that drive what that function does. We'll also look at their systems and processes and organization structure and spending. We are not going to be doing consulting activities to, for instance, we're not focusing on how you brand your school system in terms of how you communicate that out. We're looking at it more from a management standpoint and what management processes are in place to make sure that the communications function is achieving the objectives it needs to achieve. And so that will be the primary focus of that audit.
Thank you. And so I guess for me, I'm not going to beat this horse to death, but I still think just aligning with what I heard around your question around the academic, what was it called? Academic program and academic program management system, and looking at the other ones that we have not audited, I still favor aligning it with the gifted and talented program, because it's similar but different in a sense from an academic perspective of how we're serving our children. Communication is definitely necessary, but to me, it's when I'm looking at the list of the things that we haven't done, I personally prioritize those two over the communication. So I guess we'll talk about it during the vote. Okay. All right.
Did I answer your question though about what's involved in the
Yeah.
communications audit? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Rice?
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. I would just like to thank you, Mr. Gibson, for your comments here, and Mrs. Tossan for your leadership on the Internal Audit Committee. In 2005, the Texas Legislature conferred the responsibility of internal audit on the Board of Trustees. It used to be the province of the superintendent. But the Texas legislature took that away from all superintendents and made a mandate that the Board of Trustees be responsible for that. And so we have been, for the last probably 7 years, undergoing a systematic process of conducting internal audits in all aspects of the organization. As you know, there's a financial audit prepared each year by our independent CPA firm, but that's a different kind of audit. But all of the audits that we undertake provide an insight into the processes and procedures that we're using, which is important to do, because as the school district grows and becomes larger, certain processes that once were great for a school district half our size no longer work, and they need to be expanded. And that's what these internal audits tell us. So when the audits come back, we meet with the administration and the auditor and look at the recommendations that the internal auditor has found. Some of those recommendations the administration may agree with or they may disagree with, and they cite their reasons, and then we have an action plan going forward. And once that audit is performed and has been accepted by the Internal Audit Committee, it's presented here to the board, and it becomes a part of the public domain. But we just don't leave it there. We do follow up with that within the next 12 months to make sure that all of the recommendations are in fact being implemented. And so, as Dr. Dupree said, those internal audits are in the public domain. They're on the website once they've been approved and accepted by the board. And also, I would like to add that Gibson Consulting, because the audit universe is so broad, from child nutrition, for transportation, to procurement, to facilities maintenance, to the academic programs, no one individual can possess all of the requisite knowledge and skill and experience necessary to conduct an effective audit of all those areas. And so Gibson is able to bring in specialists in those various areas to aid in the development of the audit. And so when they're finished, we know we have an audit that will bear scrutiny. It will bear public scrutiny. And all of those things eventually may feed into what the state is proposing, an efficiency audit. Although they talk about an efficiency audit, they have not yet defined what that means. So I would say that I just would like everyone here to know, and who may be watching, that we do have a very rigorous audit function. And just to add to Mrs. Tossan's comments, we have a budget that we have to live within, and we can't audit the whole world in 1 year. And we try to vary the audits between departments so not one department is overburdened with audits at any given time. We try to work that out so that they're balanced going forward. So that's just by way of information I wanted to add to what you said, Mrs. Tossan. And it's a far cry from when I first got on the board, and the only thing we were auditing was campus activity funds, which actually have no risk to the district whatsoever, because it's not our money. Makes a big splash in the headlines, but if the Booster Club funds go missing, but the district is not harmed, what we're doing is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mrs. Tossan, do you have anything else you'd like to say? Thank you very much for leading the committee. Thank you, Mr. Gibson, for being here this evening and for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you.